COP26. Yes, that's our next conversation this morning on Sunrise. And we have Ben Llewellyn-Jones, who is British Deputy High Commissioner in Lagos, joining us this morning to have a conversation around the 26th session of the Conference of the Parties. I hope I got that right. I didn't murder the name, did I?
No, not at all. It's a pleasure to be with you. You were very, very, very points.
All right. Thank you very much. Well, that banner right behind you, the Climate Change Conference UK 2021, is something that is giving everyone concern already all over the world. But let me begin this conversation by asking you, 6 years after signing the Paris Agreement, how far would you say the world has come?
I think the world's come a long way, and no doubt there's further to go, but a long way. And if you think that at Paris, the world was essentially committing to a 4-degree rise in world temperature, that was, that was not the ambition, but that's what the commitment showed. What we're seeing as we head towards COP26 is much, much closer now to that 1.5-degree rise that, although dangerous, is still within manageable limits. So we're bending the curve each time we put pressure on, and COP26 is going to bend it still further, we hope.
Cool. According to reports and the plan. But this is the 6th year, postponed last year due to, of course, COVID-19. In terms of the articles, the 29 of them, which one would you say countries all over the world are battling with the most? That's a little more difficult, or perhaps most difficult for nations to contend with.
Yeah, I think most of the question, I think it's really, I think it's Article 6, isn't it, which is around rules around financing, which is particularly difficult, and understandably so. I mean, one of the key ways in which we make those climate mitigation targets to reduce carbon emissions real and to help countries adapt is to create the climate finance needed. And the rules around how that climate finance is accessed and spent are crucially important. So that's a big part of the negotiation to come over the next 2 weeks in Glasgow, as well as, of course, showing that we're raising the climate finance to $100 billion a year that's needed. And again, we've gone a long, long way towards that, and we can say more about it, but huge strides since Paris to make that real.
Perhaps that also speaks to the partnerships that need to be formed by governments. One of those crucial issues is that of financing, how countries are supporting one another. How far would you say we've come with that?
I think a long way. I mean, I think there's also a realism now around how hard this is, which I think is important. I think one of the things we can say about COP26 is certainly there are aspirational targets, but there are much more real and practical and reachable targets, and climate finance is one. It's true we will not have $100 billion of finance from 2020 every year as we want, but we know we can make it by 2023, and we know how to do that. And we also know now what's required, and there's a pathway to doing that in a much more meaningful way. So there's realism, I think, amidst the ambition, and that comes from a lot of hard work, but also real-world commitment from leaders, those who are gathering in Glasgow ahead of this time too, to change the way their economies work, which takes some pain, some struggle, but also has opportunity for the future, not least in countries like Nigeria.
Capacity is one of those things that that is crucial. One of the conversations that a number of people would have around that would be, okay, so there are some countries that understand what climate change is about, I mean, quite significantly, but there are those who are still struggling with the realities, perhaps because it's not even as real in their own part of the world as in other parts of the world that are really feeling the pinch. So in terms of capacity, what do you see? In what areas do you think nations need to balance each other out specifically? You've talked about the funding part of it. What other areas would you say this conference will address the issue of capacity in order for nations to support each other to achieve one goal?
Absolutely, very, very important. I mean, I think you're right that there's different degrees of, if not understanding, experience of climate change. But I mean, I'm in Lagos. If you say to someone climate change, they might say, okay. If you say flooding, they'll say, absolutely. No, I get that. That's real for me. If you go to other parts of Nigeria, drought. If you talk to farmers in Nigeria, they'll say rainfall. You know, these effects are being felt. And I think across the world, actually, they're being felt, although to some degree, much more serious, frankly, in the developing world where rain-fed agriculture is much more prominent naturally as a way of doing, way of living. So, you know, firstly, I think all countries feeling it, but the developing world feeling it hardest. In terms of capacity, I think there is significantly more capacity now to assist countries that are feeling the effects and so to adapt to the dangerous effects of climate change. And actually, a lot of what Glasgow will look at is, again, real-world practical ways of doing that. Climate insurance, for example, which can help people protect against the impact of flooding. Green bonds that can help states like Lagos, but Nigeria itself as well, raise money to invest in infrastructure that can be climate resilient. So real ways to address those issues that actually help make capacity possible and build it. But, you know, naturally, we're dealing with a very, very difficult situation in real time, increasingly real time, and that's the experience of climate change. And so the urgency is really felt, and Glasgow will, I think, help push us along.
Well, one other issue along that line that you're talking about now is technology. A good number of countries are battling with that. It's a reality, but it's a battle all the same. Do you see enough countries out of the 196 or so that have been expected for this conference? Do you see that technology shortfall? How significantly do you see it? And in what way do you think governments need to play up technology, both in dealing with the climate change issues and in communicating it to the people?
I think you're right again to highlight this, and technology transfer is very, very important. Transfer of knowledge, know-how, IP to other parts of the world. But I think we're seeing it happen. I mean, if you look at it in practical terms, what does technology mean? Renewable energy. How do you create renewable energy around the world? We've seen a massive change, not just in the technology available worldwide, the cost of it, importantly, much more affordable now around the world. And that's not come by accident. It's come by market pressure, government pressure, subsidy. It's really, really pushed the envelope on that. And that kind of technology is available here now in Nigeria. I think there's more that can be done to make it still more readily available and more affordable to ordinary people and to business. We, for example, would welcome the removal of duty on the imports of standalone solar systems into Nigeria. It would make it, you know, much more affordable for off-grid energy to be accessible. Because we realize when it comes to technology, it's not just about new and the whizzy and the kind of the things that are new and exciting. It's about making sure real people get access to energy. And in a country like Nigeria, that's fundamental and a real part of what COP26 is trying to do as well, helping people who've never had access to energy get access to energy, but clean, sustainable energy.
There's something that you said earlier that I think we should give a little more attention to, since a good number of people are watching this now, and a sizable number of people understand what climate change is about, but a huge number of people all over the world are still wondering what this is about. So that puts a question mark on communicating how people can contribute to the challenges of climate change and helping their governments to achieve the Paris Agreement, and including all of the NDCs that they may have contributed and put forward. So in communicating climate change issues to the average citizen of any country all over the world, what are the things that should be put out by the governments and by environment activists?
I think the most important thing for people to communicate, to understand, to communicate to each other is around how to make their living world more sustainable, how to live in a more sustainable way. And, you know, in small ways, we can all make a difference. You know, reusing plastic is a very, very clear example. Again, I live in Lagos, I do beach cleanups, and I'm struck by how much plastic's thrown away. And actually, if we can reuse and recycle plastic, we're reducing the amount of energy being used to produce plastic, reducing carbon emissions. We're also, frankly, impacting things like flooding. You know, often flooding comes from blocked up drains as much as it comes from rainfall. So I think really, and you're right, you know, making this real for people is around how to change their lived experience and how they can contribute to that and how we can incentivize that change in behavior. Secondly, I think it's about at least people putting pressure on their governments to provide solutions that are sustainable for them. I mean, in a way, I think coal is a very good example. People want access to energy, and in parts of the world, coal is the predominant source of energy. Trouble is, coal is directly contributing to the kind of rainfall, the flooding, the experience they're having. And that's not sustainable. We realize that, we know that. So how do we help governments, and how do people help their governments to say, we need sustainable forms of energy that don't give us the wider problems that coal produces? So I think it's about making it real for people and the things they can do, and a sustainable living environment.
Change in behavior, you talked about that in a little bit. Getting that across can be quite a task, given that people have their real issues that they are contending with on a daily basis. How do we begin to communicate that? Change in behavior. This is how I got to where I am now, and I need to move away from it. But I can't move away from it and achieve the things that I've achieved over the years. How do we begin to communicate that?
So I think the first answer is to say, that there are opportunities from the change itself. So actually what we can do is to create a world, we are creating a world where there's more opportunities. So for example, for a lot of people in Nigeria, that they don't have access to energy, the opportunity of renewable energy means they will. So actually we can improve their living condition, improve their circumstance, improve their access to clean energy, clean cooking stoves and so on. That's a possibility that climate change and our action against climate change brings in a way that it might not have done. So I think that's the first thing, is opportunity. The second, I think, is to say that the impact and the dangerous impact of us continuing as we do is going to make our lived circumstance worse, flooding worse, drought worse, agricultural yield less. And the third, I think, is then to show how not just opportunity, but jobs can come from this, real world employment. Because again, as you say, people are interested in the now, day to day, how do they feed their family? Jobs can come from this in the green economy. And I think, again, Nigeria is well placed to experience that, to benefit from that, if we can harness the opportunity in the right way.
Excited about that part, creating jobs. Please, give me a lecture on that. Not too long, but, because, I mean, people want jobs, right? People want, employment created, and every part of the world, every country in the world is having its own fair share of unemployment issues and all of that. So if this climate change campaign can help people to get jobs, help governments to create employment for people, maybe that should be an issue that every one of them should be talking about. What are the advantages that governments need to pay attention to as we progress towards this next conference?
So I think two very concrete or very real examples for people. One would be in agriculture, where we know that agricultural yields are falling. We know that Nigeria's population is growing. We know that rainfall is a challenge. So with the advances we're making in terms of producing climate-smart agriculture, seeds that produce more crops, seeds that can withstand weather, we can have a farming population in Nigeria that can not just produce, but then can move its product up the value chain, can export. And I think, again, we can make that happen. And that's happening, if you like, as a result of technology drive from the work to combat climate change. The second is in manufacturing. It's not the case that only China or other parts of the world can produce solar kit. Why can't Nigeria? There's a real opportunity to produce renewable energy and the kit that makes renewable energy, both for use in Nigeria, where it's so badly needed, but across the world. And I think, again, that's a real opportunity we'd like to drive forward and are working with the Nigerian authorities and private businesses to do. So I think jobs can come. And again, it's about helping people to realize and to get those jobs.
Do you see policies that need some tweaking to achieve this goal you have proposed?
I do, and I think that's possible. And again, across the world, these are economy-wide changes. So I'm sure in Glasgow, how to do this in a way that protects people means that the transition to low-carbon energy can be a just transition will be discussed, and that's a real issue here in Nigeria. But some policies could change. So I mentioned the one on duty on solar kits on domestic use. At the moment, you do pay duty as you import your solar kit, your standalone solar system for domestic use. I think if that duty was removed, we'd see a massive take-up, a much bigger take-up at least, in how people want to use solar energy in Nigeria. That would be great. I think the second, and I know it's difficult, and I understand many of the complexities around it, perhaps not all, but the fuel subsidy itself, there's not an incentive to move, I think, at the moment to lower carbon forms of energy production. We should look at how to phase that out. I think and to do so in a way that, again, allows for just transition for those who'll be impacted most. I think thirdly, we want to create an enabling environment for all businesses in Nigeria, but I think some of the, and we can look at some of the policies that can help to do that, but I think it's really important to speed the flow of goods, for example, coming into Nigeria, not just solar kit, but other goods too. That can help stimulate manufacturing. I think as well with infrastructure, it's not just about energy, it's about roads, making sure, again, that people can get their product, their climate smart agricultural product from wherever they are to Lagos, onto a ship, out to wherever they need to do. These things don't happen by accident, and government needs to create the enabling environment. And, we're working with the federal authorities and state authorities to do that. They take time, I know, but it's important we keep trying.
Well, we can't wait for you to get the results because everyone wants answers. Well, there was something you talked about the other time. You talked about funding. It's just one of two of the most important issues that stall success at these climate conferences, the second one being trust. So how do you think trust can be built, especially from developing countries who believe that this climate solutions will prevent them from developing using available resources in their countries?
It's a very, very good question. I think trust and transparency, those two issues, are two of the most important things we're trying to achieve at COP26, which is why we're making it a physical COP, bring people together even in these difficult times, because we know that trust is often best built by connection between people, being able to look at each other and say, is this for real? I think importantly, when it comes to the finance side, showing that money is actually available. The UK has made a significant pledge, 11.6 billion UK pounds available at least between 2020 and 25. That's a ceiling, that's a floor. That's a floor, not a ceiling, in terms of our climate finance commitment. So I think developed countries have to show we are showing that money being available, being spent. I think that helps build trust actions. I think the second thing is also showing our own decarbonisation in the developed world. And again, the UK has made a massive push towards that with our net zero strategy, first major economy to really produce the most sophisticated, developed net zero strategy. And again, I think the pressure we apply to get more developed countries to do that will show developing countries this is not something that others are avoiding and asking others to take action on their behalf. And then thirdly, that we show we're committed to addressing the concerns developing countries have around energy access, for example. If we're saying, gas should be a transition fuel, not a fuel that's used forever, show us how renewable energy can replace that. And I think the onus is on us to do that in a way that makes sense, and we are. But trust comes from the actions that we take.
That sounds like more opportunities you're talking about there. But, you just mentioned net zero right now. So there's that conversation, that's contest, if I can use that term, between net zero and real zero. On the one hand, maybe countries are saying that net zero, perhaps considering using economic considerations. But environmentalists are talking about real zero emissions. What's the difference and how far so far? What are the things that need to be put in place to achieve either? Which one is better for us anyway?
Well, it's a live debate, and I understand it. And I think, that just to demystify it, net zero essentially says that, we will be using carbon in the future, but we're going to be offsetting that either through our reforestation or our carbon sinks. And it also, I think, recognises that transition is required, that carbon emissions need to peak at a certain point and then decline as countries are able to embrace new technologies around renewable energy, whereas real zero, I think, is a much more aggressive strategy towards decarbonising immediately. And I think for us, not just the UK, but I think for us and our partners, we recognise the real world impact on people, those people watching, listening, to making radical changes very, very quickly, not least in the developing world. So I think it's about how we can do those changes in a just way, and also, to be honest, expecting new technology to help us to make those changes real and meaningful. And one thing that's been shown, I've said it, is how our work, our action to tackle climate change has driven technological advances. It really has, and I think we're going to see that accelerate again as we see financing pushed away from fossil fuels and towards renewable technology. So, we believe net zero is the right approach, not just for the UK but globally, because it helps make that just transition more possible. But transparency and trust is important. The debate around real zero will happen at COP26 in Glasgow. It's right that it does. People need to have their view and have their say, and we hope they do so. and we make progress. That's the key thing.
Well, what are some of those, I'm looking for the right word now, maybe political or diplomatic eggshells that need to be managed in the build-up to this conference? You've spoken about trust and transparency. Perhaps that suggests that maybe there's some, issues around that now that need to be addressed. So what are some of those diplomatic eggshells that need to be navigated as we build up to this conference starting very soon?
So I think trust and transparency at the heart of it, and I think as I am a diplomat, but I often believe that the best way of getting these issues resolved is to get them out in the open. I think trust is a key one. I think the second is confidence that transition will happen, and that means that developed countries, all countries there, will keep their commitments. And I think Nigeria's made a really ambitious nationally determined contribution. That's fantastic, and we will help Nigeria as it implements that. China, India, the USA, the European Union, the UK need to keep our promises. And I think that's really, really important. And we're committed in the UK to doing that. And we want to make sure that others are equally committed. So understanding how we know those promises are being kept, understanding how coal, for example, is being phased out in large parts of the world where it's predominantly used at the moment, understand that can be made to happen. I think that's key.
Well, some countries, we understand, had initially withdrawn and hopefully coming back now. What's the level of confidence of their return, and how sustainable is that, in your opinion?
Well, I think the country that's perhaps most in the spotlight around withdrawal and return is, of course, the United States of America. And we've seen massive leadership from President Biden, but also his special envoy, John Kerry, for whom this is a very familiar debate, but real energy and real diplomatic drive as well. And it's fantastic to have them engaging and also contributing on climate finance. We've also seen engagement from China, from India, and I think every country is different. The challenges are different. I think what we need to see now when it comes to COP26 is not just the developing world stepping up, and it's the big emitters stepping up: China, India, EU, US. The developed world needs to step up in that space. So I think that's going to be the pressure. I'm not sure if that's a diplomatic eggshell or not, but it's very clear.
Well, okay. Let me allow that slide. But there's something that also came to mind as you spoke, and that's the fact that it seems that the different countries of the world, we're all interested in our different silos. While we know that climate change issues are global issues, it's a global issue. What happens in Glasgow could have an effect in what happens in Accra. What happens in Somalia could have impact on what happens in Shanghai. We seem to not know. I mean, maybe we know, we just play the ostrich around that issue. How are we finding a way to communicate the far-reaching effects of the single action of one little individual in one country to a whole nation or community in another country or continent altogether?
Well, it is tough, but I think there's more that's been done, and in Glasgow will show that too. There's models now, for example, that show the impact of climate rise and the impact on sea level rise. Those models are terrifying when you look at them, particularly when you think about 4-degree rise in temperature, which we hope very much to avoid. We're looking at 1.5-degree rise only. But they show the impact on low-lying communities. They also model, for example, the kind of investment that would be needed around flood defences, around agriculture. So there are models that help with that. I think the very excellent youth activism we've seen, not least from Africa, not least from Nigeria, to be honest, the Nigerian youth activists going to COP probably there right now, who've really stood up and spoken to their own constituencies in and around Nigeria. And they have a voice and a credibility that, that is fantastic. I think they're getting that message across. And I think then, as I say, sadly, the real-world impacts of climate change are being felt now more broadly. So for all of us, it's harder to pretend that this isn't something happening now. When the rain falls in Lagos, we all look out the window and worry. And I think, we did that before for sure, but we do that in a much more serious way now. We think about the impact on those in low-lying communities in Lagos itself. We can't escape that. So I think communication is a big issue, but I think it's less of an issue than it was. I think action is the real issue now. People are saying, okay, I get there's a problem. What are we going to do about it? What are you going to do about it? That's what we're trying to get to now.
Well, if communication is an issue, not as significant an issue as action now, perhaps that means that maybe the communication is not, what's the word now, actionable enough? You know.
Maybe. I mean, I think what people, I mean, you know, climate change is often considered a very technical issue, and I think the negotiators in Glasgow will go into depth in all these articles that you referred to and so on. But I think when it comes to action, the kind of things that people want to see, they can understand. They can understand where their energy comes from. You know, that's a very communicable thing. People know that energy comes from coal or from renewable energy. You can know that. They can understand that the plastic they're using is single use or not. So I think getting the message across for people and people getting the message back to their leaders is doable. They don't need to understand the articles. That's not the problem. It's about what we change.
Mr. Llewellyn-Jones, what are the implications of not taking climate change actions now? What are the implications in the next 5 years, in the next 10 years, in the next 20 years, in the next 30 years? What are the implications?
In the models, as I said, the models are terrifying. And of course, the impact is different depending where you are in the world. But basically, if you're in the developing world, the impacts are incredibly serious around flooding, agriculture, population movement, conflict over water and resources. You know, the implications are extremely serious. And the reason we need to take action now, commit to action and take action now is because after a point, it is difficult to avoid the baked-in climate change rise of temperatures that we know will happen. We're seeing that already. A rise of 1.5 degrees is not ideal, but that's manageable. A rise of 2 degrees is really not ideal. A rise of 4 degrees, of 6 degrees is catastrophic for large parts of the world that then become uninhabitable. So, you know, it's easy to say that, it's hard to address that, but I think we're much clearer now about the kinds of consequences we'll face if we don't both take action and commit to further action now.
How well, how significantly are we carrying along young people? Because in another 20 years from now, the people in government now may not be in government anymore, 20, 30 years from now. How well are we carrying young people along who will continue the campaign you're talking about?
I don't think young people are the problem. If I'm honest, it's old people. I think young people in Africa, in the developed world too, are absolutely seized of this issue. You know, my 10-year-old daughter tells me about climate change all the time, and that's not unique to her. I think the problem is for generations above that who understand the risk, but are actually having to manage the transition and the pace at which they can move and are prepared to move. I think young people are playing a vital role in pushing for that ambition. And also saying quite clearly, you know, we will live with these consequences, financial and life, but otherwise don't make choices. So young people are playing, you know, if they're on the field, they're playing offense. What we need to do is drag the rest of the team with them and try and get those goals, because I think it's really important across the generational divide, actions taken.
So just one last one for you. What are the expectations from this conference?
So, I mean, we are very ambitious, and I know there's lots of talk about the risks of not succeeding, but we see the opportunity of success. And I think for us, seeing the commitment to climate action that will mean we only have a 1.5 degree rise in global temperature, you know, locking in commitments, that's key. Secondly, on finance, and I've said it's possible, we've shown a path, but getting the commitment to make that climate finance work and be available. Thirdly, making sure that finance can be available to support adaptation and also the natural world. You know, one of the key things that's changed over the last few years has been an understanding that sustaining the natural world, mangrove swamps, for example, in Nigeria, is critical to our actions to tackle climate change. It's a good thing in itself, and it's critical for that reason too. And then finally, and most importantly, making sure that climate finance is available. That's a Paris rulebook that we talked about earlier. And making sure that climate finance is available to developing countries across the world. So we think success is achieving those things and really pushing on with positive momentum, because not everything will be achieved in Glasgow, we know that, but it's about pushing on with positive momentum beyond.
Well, Ben Llewellyn-Jones, British Deputy High Commissioner in Lagos, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been quite illuminating.
To be with you.
All right. So, we're back in a moment for another one. Do stay with us.